As long as LTC is ready, we will go ahead and open the meeting on this January 13th of the Community Preservation Committee. If I could ask Dylan to take the roll, please.
Chairman Bakey. Vice Chair Slagle.
Here.
Member Gallivan.
Here.
Member Liang.
Here.
Member Butenhuis.
Here.
Member Shea. Member Shea. Member McCall.
Here.
Member DePeza.
Here.
Member Shea.
Present.
Member Linehan.
Okay. Having a quorum, we'll move on to the next order of business. The minutes for approval, the December 16th, 2021 meeting minutes for approval. Does anybody have any comments or concerns about the minutes for the December 16th meeting? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve the December 16th meeting minutes.
Second?
Motion made and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Carries. And now on to, we have no continued business. Now we'll move on to new business, which is the deliberation and vote on the 2021 CPA applications. Community Preservation Committee will deliberate on all CPA applications submitted for the current application cycle. At the conclusion of deliberations, the CPC will vote on the funding recommendations, which will be sent to the City Council for approval. I will note for folks in the audience and anyone at home, we may not reach a vote tonight. There is another meeting on our schedule for January the 27th. At that time, we may be taking a vote, or we may reach a vote tonight, depending on how quickly we move through the projects. That being said, I will open it up to the members if they have any suggestions as to how we should go through this. I have some thoughts, but I wanted to hear it from other folks first.
Before we get started, I was wondering, can you show us who the participants are? Is there a way to do the?
I don't have control over the Zoom on the screen. LTC
Oh.
does. I can see the list though, so I can.
Maybe,
you know
I'm just curious to see who's listening, and then if we have questions, so we know if we can ask or not. No?
I think you can see who's on screen. Dylan knows who's on screen.
I know I'm asking, can he tell the group so we know?
Okay. Oh yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so the list of participants in the meeting include Allison Lamy, Amy Weatherby from Community Teamwork, Bob Wilbur from Mass Autobahn, Kathy Mercado, the Clemente Park Committee, Francie Slater, Jessica Wilson from Mill City Grows, Elle Stetson from Mass Autobahn, Gail Yao from Mass Autobahn, Chris Skopanich from Mass Autobahn, Nancy Cohen from Mass Autobahn, Renata Pomponi from Mass Autobahn, Victoria Jones from Mass Autobahn, Sarah Bogosian from the Whistler House, and Claire Ricker from CBA.
So I just wanted to note for the record that Dylan has provided the members of the committee with a very nice summary of the 13 CPA applications, along with the total requests and the total amount of funding that was currently available. I think that's a really helpful tool for us to have for these deliberations, and I want to thank Dylan for putting that together for us. Once again, does anybody have any suggestions? I do have some thoughts about ways to maybe streamline this process, but I don't want to step on anybody else if they feel strongly that they have some suggestions about how we can move forward.
I'd love to maybe eliminate some, if we were willing to talk about things that we can agree to not fund. I know that's not an easy conversation to have publicly, but we will have to do that at some point. So, yeah,
Okay,
I'd love to shorten the list.
Yeah, that's one thing.
You gonna go first?
Yeah, sure.
So I was thinking actually about doing the other direction, which is I actually think that there is some mechanisms that we've investigated with the Community Preservation Coalition and some things that we took a look at that might make this a little bit easier, and that is a proposal to use our ability to bond against future CPA provisions for certain projects. And so I think if that's something that the committee is comfortable with discussing, I think that there are two projects that are proposed before us today that it makes sense for us to bond. And I guess I'll just go out and say it. I think that the Rowley's Farm project and the windows at City Hall, the stained glass windows at City Hall, that those two projects make sense to bond. The reason for that is, in my opinion, I think the Rowley's Farm project is a once in a ever chance for the city to protect that land. If we don't do it now, it won't come up again, and there is no other plot of land like that in the city, unlike some municipalities who have open space that they can protect, and they have undisturbed land, and Lowell, we don't. And if we chose to bond that amount, we would be paying it off with future allocations of the CPA surcharge and not out of this year's allocation.
I was just gonna say, I agree that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and was prepared to vote tonight to allocate the money. So I think for those who are listening, and also maybe other board members who may not have participated or familiar with bonding, what would we be tying ourselves to for future if we chose to go the bond route? And then would that limit our capacity to allocate funds? Because next year or even the year after, because this is an unprecedented year, we're never going to have this much, likely in the near future, ever going to have this much money in front of us again. And so I think if we could clarify that for other board members who may have that question, but also for those listening,
Sure.
it'd be helpful.
So in anticipation for this conversation, I did have a meeting with Connor Baldwin, who's the CFO, and asked him about general bonding. We had a conversation, he and I, with the city's bond council to try and dig a little deeper into that. And then Dylan and I both participated in a webinar this week, actually, provided by the Community Preservation Coalition about bonding from future CPA allocations. So the assumptions that I'm using are, based on these calculations, are the full amount, which is the 1.5 million that Rowley Farm asked for. If we bonded that for 20 years, I think Connor indicated that the last time he sold bonds for the city, the rate was slightly lower than 2%. So if you bonded for the city at 2% over 20 years, that amortization would come out to be approximately $91,000 a year for 20 years. And so that, and the way that would work is it would lower our CPA, the discretionary funds that we as a community preservation committee would have in those future years. So instead of having the approximately $1 million, we would have $91,000 less every year, and our budget would have to reflect the paying of that $91,000 towards the bond every year out of our budget. I think that makes sense because we'd be getting a forever asset in Rowley's Farm. But that just gives you kind of an idea, 91,000. If we bonded the stained glass windows, which I think were approximately 473. You'd be talking about $30,000 a year in bonding for that. And if we continue to bring in about $1 million a year, it would mean that instead of $1 million to allocate in future years, we'd have $870,000 or so to allocate in future years.
Were you thinking of the complete 1.5 million, or is there anything less than that you're thinking about?
Well, I was my proposal would be that we bond the complete 1.5 million. That we do that, and we understand as a community preservation committee that we'll be paying $91,000 out of the surcharge every year for the next 20 years. And that's kind of the cost of doing business. We're basically buying the conservation of an unprecedented piece of land for in perpetuity at a cost I think is, spread out over a long period of time, because I think it should be paid for by kind of all the future taxpayers that are going to get the benefit of it will be paying for it over the next 20 years. I do want to recognize that Adam Becky, who's the chair, has come to the meeting. Good to see you, Adam.
Thank you, Eric.
Um,
I actually wanted to comment on another piece of this topic, actually, if I could, as well, and very germane to the question. The other thing we have to remember, particularly around the Rowley's Farm request, is that the Community Preservation Committee is required, and the city is required, to either spend or set aside 10% of our funds every year for open space projects. And given the level of development in Lowell, there are definitely other opportunities, but there are not nearly as many opportunities in that particular program area as there are in others, or in the other program areas. So we are going to need to be allocating, if it's $1 million a year, we're going to need to be allocating $100,000 a year every year for open space just to meet the requirements of the program. And that happens to be about the amount that we would need to be spending every year to bond for what is arguably one of the the largest opportunities that might exist in Lowell for open space projects. So it's not necessarily that making this commitment takes money away necessarily from other priorities, because that money might not have been able to be spent on some of those other priorities anyway. That's not necessarily the same thing with the stained glass windows.
So we'd be killing two birds with one stone with the Raleigh Farm bonding. We wouldn't be hamstringing our future selves. We'd actually probably be helping our future selves.
And that is a way to look at it. And we're not obligated to limit ourselves to only spending 10% if there are other open space projects that emerge and opportunities that emerge that prove to be good ideas. We're not precluded from supporting those also. But we are obligated to at least set aside 10% of our money for that purpose going forward. So.
Yeah, I think it's kind of important to note that unlike what I can see from historic preservation and housing, it's very unlikely that we are going to get something of this scope coming down the pike for open space. Like we're not going to see these sorts of requests for money and these sorts of allocations for open space, I don't think, in the future. I think that historic preservation will continue to be things that come up, and housing, I'm certain there are going to continually be people asking for money for housing. But with open space, it's kind of building on what Adam said. There's a finite amount in Lowell, and so there's going to be a finite amount of projects that we're going to be able to do. And setting this up so if we're in the situation where we don't get open space projects of a large volume on a regular basis, we're still meeting our requirements to spend money on open space every year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not against it. I'm just looking to the futures so that we're not hamstrung the first, round here, and, for future project, we might cut ourselves short. But if, you cover all the bases looking forward, and, you know, we're gonna be fine of, you know, funding in additional projects. I mean, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, so I mean, that's, and I think, so the reason why I wanted to throw that out first is, because I think if we as a committee agree that we want to do that with those projects, it takes, you know, almost $2 million worth of asks kind of off of this year's amount and puts the, and you know, so we'd be spending about $125,000 a year in bonding for those two projects. And that would be, you know, for future years, for, you know, stretched out. But one of them is a city asset that we're, you know, that is City Hall, that the city is obviously going to own forever. And the other one is an open space asset that we're going to be buying, you know, for, you know, that conservation restriction forever, and it will continue to benefit the city. Whereas some of these other private projects may not have a 20-year window of benefit to the city. And so that's why I was proposing it for those two projects.
I have a question. If, I don't think that this would happen, but if in 10 years the city voted to not enact the CPA Act, what would that mean for the following 10 years?
That actually was a part of the webinar that we went to this week. So first of all, and this is just, I think everybody knows this, no community has ever revoked the CPA, but if they do, the Department of Revenue says you have two options, which is, number one is you leave the surcharge in place, and every dollar that comes into the city is put towards the paying off of the bond until it's paid off, and then the surcharge goes away. Or the other is that you eliminate the surcharge except for the amount that is needed to pay just the annual fee or the annual
Debt service.
payment on the bond, and then once the bond is paid off, it goes away. So it lasts for another till the 20-year bond is paid off, and then the surcharge goes away. So those are the two things that and I think that the city gets to decide which one of those two they want to do. But the surcharge itself has to stay in place until it's paid off, but you use all the money to pay it off instead of then putting it in those buckets.
Eric, if I could ask, when you were researching what the costs might be, the annual debt service costs, did you consider the fact that we have $263,000 and change that we have to commit to open space in this first pot, which is obviously larger? Would it make sense to make that be a down payment, so to speak, and then borrow the balance or bond for the balance? Is that something you looked into?
That is certainly something that, you know, we could, so there's two ways that we could do that, which is we could pay for the debt service out of pre-existing funds that are in that pot, or we could you know, we could fund it by paying $250,000 out of open space now and only bonding $1.25 million. I mean, I think that.
We ultimately don't have access to that $263,000 for any of the other applications that are before us right now, because none of them are open space projects. If we didn't allocate it.
Well, we do. The Whistler House is in the Clemente Park.
That's recreation. Recreation doesn't, my understanding of the law is that the open space requirement must be for open space preservation, and recreation projects are eligible, but they don't count against the 10% ceiling. I don't know, is that something that we've checked on or asked about?
I'm trying to remember if that.
My understanding was this was the only project before us that meets the requirement for that 10% spend right now. Now, obviously, there could be others in the future, but right now, that's the only one, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point to determine. I did think that Whistler House was open space, but you believe that it's under recreation?
It says on here open space / recreation, but I don't know if we're not buying a conservation restriction, I don't know that it can qualify as against that open space minimum requirement.
Right.
And maybe we don't have to determine that right now necessarily, but we probably, we need to determine that, I guess, before we finalize the
Sure.
the plan.
No, I think that's correct.
Yeah, I know.
So, I definitely don't want to talk about those two projects as two projects that we consider bonding. Certainly, we could discuss both of them separately. At first, my gut reaction to bonding the Raleigh's Farm project would be that we are limiting ourselves in future acquisitions. There's always the option to spend the money, but there's a reason why there's 10% in each bucket. Yes, this is a very important project, but that 10% every year gives us that opportunity to choose and spend 10% every year, and for us to make that decision this year is a little worrisome, right? So that was my first gut, but we're also looking at 10% of $1 million, which is $100,000. Raleigh's Farm is not going to meet that threshold to cover our yearly payment, so that we would have to choose another project every year, and that idea made me feel a little bit better about the thought of having the bond out continuous for the 20 years or however long we decide it to be.
I should clarify, we are not obligated to choose a project. We just have to reserve that money for that part of the program. So if we did face a situation where we didn't have any open space projects before us, say next year, I don't know that'll be the case, but let's say it was, and we were spending $90,000 or maybe less on the bond, we wouldn't have to, we could basically bank the 10 or 20 or whatever the difference is for future projects. We just couldn't spend it on historic preservation projects or affordable housing projects.
Yes. That's a little bit different, though, than the idea of having a project in front of us that we really should fund, but we probably let ourselves off and don't fund it because of all the money that's going toward Raleigh's Farm that we made a decision 15 years ago that's still on the books, when everybody that's sitting at this table is long forgotten about why we did that in the first place, and it's just part of the city. So I would support wholeheartedly bonding that project without a down payment.
I will say I was prepared to vote to fund the project without bonding tonight, so if that's the way the group goes, then I'm fine with that too.
I'd like to make sure everyone has a voice in this. Member Liang?
I mean, I agree with Brad. I mean, if that could be the case, and I'm all for bonding these two projects together, so I'm good with that. And it's just my concern, I already said it, as long as we all can cover future projects, then I'm good with that.
And I guess just to clarify, to ask the question for anyone's listening, for all intents and purposes, it would make no difference to the applicant whether we bonded or not. They would see the funds. Correct?
Yeah, they would see the funds right away, right? Or not right away. We aren't going to pass out a check tonight, but fairly soon. Either. Member DePizza, I didn't know if you had any thoughts on this, if you wanted to.
Yeah, so I mean, from just hearing the deliberation, I think I'm in favor of, bonding, both projects. And I do understand that, yes, the farm, I mean, I think I don't want to say a lifetime opportunity, but I do agree. I'm not sure how much more open space would come around to fund. So yeah, I'm in favor of bonding both projects.
And Member Gallivan?
I'm in favor of the project, whether we bond it or we choose to fully fund it tonight. I was prepared to vote before the bond conversation.
Member Shea is also on the Zoom as well.
Oh, is he? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you can't see him.
Oh, okay. Well, Member Shea, do you have a?
Thank you for the thoughts. I think there's a lot of work that's gone into this. I'm in favor for bonding also. I only have one question, Mr. Chairman, and that is, when this matter goes before to the manager, to the city council, because of the bonding issue, will that necessitate a 2/3 vote of the council?
Yes.
It will.
Sounds
Okay,
like
well, Okay, thank you. No, but I agree with generally the comments that have been made earlier. And I want to thank Eric for the work he's done on coming up with this solution. Thank you.
Do we have anyone else, any other members online? Okay, great. Well, hearing that, I think we have a couple options. It sounds like there's support for this idea. Do we want to, is anyone interested in making a motion on one or both of these projects now? Or do we want to discuss others first?
I mean, I think it makes sense to discuss the others, but I think if we all understand that it makes it easier in my mind to discuss others if we have an idea that if we can bond 1.5 million, then that is not, then the money that we have available needs to cover a smaller amount of projects.
That does make the
That's-
math a little less hard.
Yeah. So that would be-
Mr. Chairman, I would encourage you to have the vote now. I'm going to be participating probably for another hour and a half or two, and I'll be leaving at that point. So I would appreciate to have a vote on this matter now, thank you. Or forthwith, thank you.
Would you like to make that in the form of a motion?
Good, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I make that in form of motion to accept the, and you can give me the legal wording for the motion, because this can put quite a bit. Whatever Eric said, play back the tape, and I just think it's the bonding of the farm, I guess. But no, I just think I'd appreciate to have a vote now. Thank you. And I move forward with that motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, correct me if I mischaracterize this, but we have a motion to support the idea of bonding for the cost of the Rowley's Farm acquisition project.
Second.
We have a second. Any further discussion on that topic?
So the first year payment of that bond would go against our open space totals for this year? No?
Next year.
Not next year. So we haven't touched that 2593 at all.
Correct.
Although we do again have to reserve 263,000 of it for open space, and
Of course.
and we may not be able to allocate that to any of the other projects before us tonight. We'll
Yeah.
use that for future.
We'll figure that out later.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Got it.
Yep.
Understood.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Any other discussion on this one? If that, can we have a roll call on this one, please?
The motion should just mention the life of the bond, how long it is.
20 years.
20 years.
Is what I suggested.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, and Chairman Bakey,
Yes.
Vice Chair Slagle,
Yes.
Member Butenhuis,
Yes.
Member Gallivan,
Yes.
Member McCall,
Yes.
Member Liang,
Yes.
Member DePeza,
Yes.
and Member Shea.
Yes.
Okay. I would suggest that we, while I'm very interested in the other project that's been recommended for bonding, I do think it is a slightly different question given the competing interest in the historic preservation funding right now. So I would suggest that might be one that we keep in mind, that is a very good solution potentially, but maybe not act on that one quite yet, unless others feel differently.
I agree entirely. Seems like we might want to just stay on open space while we're getting started.
Okay, well, we can certainly do the recreation projects, sure. The first one here before us is the one that I need to recuse myself for, so I will turn it back over to Vice Chair Slagle for that one.
Thank you. So I do think, based on what the chairman had mentioned for the prior discussion, that I think we do need to make a determination. Is this recreation or open space? My recollection, and please, folks, correct me if anybody remembers differently, is that in our conversations regarding this one, that the Whistler House was asked if they were willing to put a restriction on the property, and they indicated that they were. Does anybody else have any memory about that?
If there's not
discussion?
already one on there, they certainly are willing to if there's not one already.
Yeah, that was my understanding.
I just don't know if we're actually buying one because they might already have one. Can't remember.
Okay.
I know that it's chapter 97, but I don't know that there's a CR on it.
Right. And
Or
I-
Article 97, I'm sorry.
Article 97. I do think that those are two
Different.
separate and
Yes.
different, distinct items as to whether or not something has a conservation restriction on it or or is Article 97 protected because of the use of state park funds.
Are we allowed to ask the questions of the applicants for
What?
something like that in this session?
Well, I know the applicant is online.
Yes.
I know there's not a CR on it. We don't have many in the city, and
Okay, so that answers that question.
yeah.
I can tell you that they are willing to put one on.
Okay, so we have that project and the Clemente Park project. So the Whistler House project, I think we need to discuss. The
I have-
funding request is 400,000.
I have but we're only looking to, we can only spend 263?
No, but we have a pot of $263,000 that has to be spent on open space.
Okay,
We have not spent any of that money yet on the first vote, so.
got it.
The determination as to whether or not this is an open space project becomes important, because if it is not an open space project, then it's not eligible to get any of that bucket, and that bucket will go to nobody this year. And so it reduces the amount
That is.
of funds. So I think that determination is an important determination.
Although, just because we're talking about open space, not to add a monkey wrench, but I believe the 555 Merrimack Street project is also asking for some open space funding. And so,
Sure.
okay.
That is a very small amount, though, the 27.
I know, I just feel like we should
No,
be
no,
aware
that's
of it while we're
important.
talking about open space.
It's important to remember. So what are folks' thoughts about the Whistler House proposal? Does anyone would like to make any comments about the proposal?
I have considered funding this in some capacity, but I struggle to, fund it in full this year out of the funds that we have.
I agree with Member Butenhuis. I think the application had lofty aspirations, but it wasn't really clear to me. I understand what the overall project for the Whistler House is with their new building and what they would want to, partner that with the open space, but I'm not sure that I'm ready to fully fund this application, but would be open to an allocation.
Member Gallivan, do you have any thoughts?
I agree that, while I think that the overall project is a strong project, and I'm generally in support of that project, as an open space project, it wasn't very clear, how that would improve the experience for the Lowell residents. I think there was some general comments that the park was in pretty good shape as it is. I do know that they're doing, capital renovations to the building and new construction, and that's gonna be disruptive to the site. But overall, it didn't feel like the need was as strong, for example, as the need in the Clemente Park project. And obviously that ask is a lot less. So I'm generally in favor of the project, but I didn't feel strongly about funding the full $400,000.
I sort of agree. When I first heard in the presentation, I didn't realize that's a public park. I mean, I used to wait for my kids, down at the area, but I didn't realize that, community member can use it. So I mean, I like the projects, but the money a little bit too high. If you could do something with the money, and make maybe a little bit more outreach to the community that this is your park too, and you can use it, in a way. Because the first time I saw it, that, and I don't know, as a community member, other people can use that same park, and there was this thought in mind that it might be a private park. So, but I mean, it's in pretty good shape. I mean, in comparison to some of the requests. So, but I mean, I do like the project as well. But I keep circling around the money and how are we going to help them, with that. So, I mean, that's just my case. We are, if we're going to fund this, I think there's going to need a little bit more of additional support, or maybe just an outreach to the community and just more usage of it. I don't know the usage level of it, or how is it going to be, expanded to community. But I still, I can have this project in the back of my mind and see how much we can support them.
Yeah, so I mean, I have similar comments. Yeah, I wasn't. It didn't felt that strong of a project as to the benefit of the community at large. I mean, yes, I mean, as a project, it seemed pretty interesting, but yeah, it wasn't really. Yeah, I wasn't really like totally convinced. Like, oh, the local community is really going to, participate in the use of that park substantially. So, yeah, it isn't. Yeah, I mean, my sentiments are very similar as well.
Thank you, Member DePace. Member Shea, do you have any thoughts about this application? Okay. Member Shea, are you available? Okay. Okay, so it sounds like there's a general consensus among the folks who've spoken about feeling generally supportive of the project as a whole, but not being as clear as to how it either fits into the goals of the CPA or the funding seems to be larger than the benefits.
Or what the specific activities are.
Sure. So, I guess I would entertain, was anybody willing to put forward a motion or propose a motion as to how we should?
I have an additional comment
Sure.
about the project. So we have this $263,000 that we haven't spent any of it this year. We'll have approximately another $100,000 next year. This project, from what I understand, is not in construction as of right now. And there was some comments when we heard the applicant that they thought that they might be able to perform some of the landscaping work this fall, but when we really talked about the construction schedule, we weren't clear if that was even feasible for them to do the work. So if we have this funding pool available next year, which it sounds like we might for open space and recreation, there might be funds available next year that the applicant could make another case for the next round of funding. So it's just a general comment, but I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, it's I think worth discussion, especially because we're not clear on the CR and what the value of that CR would be, and is that going to exceed the $400,000 ask, and then who's going to hold it, and so that discussion hasn't really happened with this project. So, I mean, the downside of delaying is that there could be more competition next year, but. I do agree with Member Gallivan that it didn't sound like significant portion of this funds would be used in this year, in this year.
All right, so I guess I'll ask the membership then are folks, it sounds like folks may be suggesting that given the thoughts about this project, we might suggest that the applicant kind of clarify the the project in some way, get some more specifics about the meeting of the CPA goals, and perhaps come back in the next, suggest that they come back in the next round, understanding that if we don't fund them, the chances are that there's going to be at least $250,000 worth of open space funding available next year.
Well, to clarify, the application would be submitted this year.
That's true. It is, yes. Later on this year, when the next round comes through. But in the next round, I mean, does that, it sounds like that's what I'm hearing.
I mean, my other question would be, is there any urgency of funds needed to do something this year? I mean, that's probably my, last question for this.
Yeah.
Is there anything that's really, really urgent that's needed to get things done this year, that the CPA can help?
That's a fair question, and that was gonna be, we all agreed not to fully fund, but we don't have a line item budget to say, oh, we'd slash you. So I don't even know if we were to partially fund this project, where to start, and so maybe we can ask.
So I was under the impression that the first year work, that fall landscaping, would be the far right side of the property in the open field area away from the buildings. So they'd be possibly working on there was some irrigation piping underground or something that was rotting out. And then there was, a bolstering of trees, I believe, and general landscaping in that area. Also, I hesitate to make motions on individual items that we're not going to be, whether yes or no we're funding or we're not funding, because we may get down to it and find that we want to consider some variation, and I just don't want to get held to something just because we made a group consensus motion.
I don't understand that comment.
So
Sorry.
I don't really know how to say it.
I think that it sounds like Member Butenholz is concerned that we may get later in the process and say, oh, we made a mistake when we took a vote earlier.
Yes.
And we want to redo it. And while I hear that concern, I think if we took a vote on this project to fund a certain amount this year from open space funds, there are no other projects that they would be competing with except for the CPA, who only has $27,000 worth of open space funds. So if we, for instance, said, we'll fund them for $75,000 this year out of open space funds because we believe that the project, what they're doing about redoing irrigation and working on the landscaping there, is a valid open space project. Nothing we do later in a meeting is gonna, that money would always be there, regardless of whatever we do later, because there's that open space.
I do have
I don't know for sure that recreation, we don't know for sure whether or not recreation, we can't spend the money on recreation projects. Sorry.
No, I understand,
We
because
talked
my
about this
question
10%.
is, if we say like, oh, we're gonna fund, just to make the math easier for me, $100,000 for this project, and so that leaves us with 163 left in that open space bucket. If we give her part of that 10% open space, we've now signed them up for a CR, and we have no idea what the value of that CR is.
That's true, but we could make that a condition.
So it's, okay.
With the-
So
it
it might,
would
we may be,
required
we
to
may be
provide us a
signing
CR.
the applicant up for something that they're not fully aware
Sure.
the
Well, that's,
implications. So I guess that's my question. So say we did do that, 100,000, we condition it, there's a CR, so they have to figure that out, figure out the value, which has a cost. If they don't do that, we don't give them the funds then, correct?
correct.
Okay.
So there's also the question about whether or not we can spend the open space and recreation lump on recreational projects. And there's also the Clemente Park project.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah, so if you were thinking about spending more than $150,000 on Whistler House and you were concerned about the Clemente Park project, then yes.
Is it worth talking about them both then?
I think given the conflict with the chair,
Oh, sure.
that makes this a little bit
Yeah,
difficult
it
to
does.
kind of
It definitely
do,
does.
which is why I feel like we should probably come to,
Well, can I just make one comment then?
Yes.
Just so that you all are aware of it, and then we can leave substantive conversations about that application later. DPD's staff did apply for $500,000 to support the Clemente Park project. And we have a design planner who's created a master plan for the project and has made the priority phase 1 what they've applied for in the off chance that we did not fund them with this fund. So
So the city's already applying for money.
we
to do
applied
this work.
to do this work.
Out of ARPA?
No, CDBG.
Okay.
It's, so
You have the, how about the timeline? I don't remember the timeline for them, for this applicants, but what is the timeline of completion for the, you know, the money that, DPD applied?
So the CAC is meeting on the 1st, and so then they will make their allocation, and we submit it to HUD, so it would be relatively the same. And then just say that because, yes, Improve Clemente Park Group is the applicant, but it's a city park, so essentially these funding would be coming to DPD in some they'd have to coordinate with DPD because we'd have to procure everything. And so we don't have to keep talking about this project, I just feel like I needed to let you know that this is a priority project for the department. We've applied for significant funds. We're creating a master plan for the park for improvements that are well beyond the 500,000 and well beyond the 100,000, because it is arguably the highest utilized park in the city, and it's absolutely in the densest neighborhood that has the least amount of open space.
Yes.
Is
That's
there
all
a
I'll
strong
say.
likelihood that that $500,000 worth of funding would come through, or is the likelihood unknown?
I can't,
And when would it come through?
I would say there's a very strong, I would say that it's a very strong application for this funding. And we won't know in the next week or so, but we will know in a month or so.
Okay, I just think the benefit of having secured funding for modest improvements that could maybe happen in this year is a strong benefit, whereas if it's a master plan that might not happen for a few years, I'm just making another argument about funding the project.
Yeah, no, so I guess circling back around to the Whistler House project. And I unfortunately, just because of the chair's position with this, I do think we need to come to some sort of determination about this, because otherwise we're gonna have to keep sending them out every time we wanna talk about it.
That's fair.
Does anyone have willing to kind of like vocalize something that we can all vote on or not vote on? I think it feels like we need to take a,
I would make a motion not to fund the project this year, not to provide any funding this project this year.
okay, motion. Does anybody second that?
I second.
Okay, motion made and seconded. Can we have a roll call?
Vice Chair Slagle,
Yes.
Member Butenhuis,
No.
Member Galvin,
Yes.
Member McCall,
Yes.
Member Liang,
No.
Member DePeza,
No.
Member Shea. Member Shea?
No.
Okay, so that motion did not carry. So it sounds like it's not the will of, just before, I do want to give you a chance to talk, Cindy, but it sounds like the will of the majority of the committee is to take some sort of funding action for this in this round. And so I think that if somebody would like to make a motion to that effect, or start a discussion to that effect as to what level of funding folks would like to see in this round for this project.
But my thing is that, I know we're gonna meet again, maybe the 27th, is that the next meeting? I feel like maybe there's an opportunity, for the applicant that's listening, can give us during this time frame of some of maybe, again, come back to the needed or the urgency of fund that they use for. I just don't want it to just like, oh, wait until next year and stuff getting bad. So give them that time between now and the 27th if they like to submit something that we can, allocate fund for. That will be helpful for the project. I mean,
So we may have a meeting on the 27th. We also may not have a meeting on the 27th if we come to a resolution about all these projects tonight. Does anybody have any other thoughts about what they'd like to do for this? The other possibility is we just say, we're gonna table this until we have discussions about other projects, which is something else we could do. And then
I'd like to get a little further in the process and just make sure we're thinking about these projects cohesively and figuring out how we talk about them in a way that works, and talk through a few more just to make sure that we're, hashing out our kind of standard operating procedure, and come back to this later on.
Okay, would you like to make that in the form of a motion?
I would like to make a motion to proceed on to the next item.
To table this?
Table this and proceed on to the next item,
Do we
yes.
have a second for that motion?
I second that.
Okay, can we have a roll call on the motion to table this item until the end of the discussion?
Vice Chair Slagle,
Yes.
Member Butenhuis,
Yes.
Member Galvin,
Yes.
Member McCall,
Yes.
Member Liang,
Yes.
Member DePeza,
Yes.
and Member Shea.
No,
Okay, so that motion passes. We'll be tabling the Whistler House discussion until the end of the meeting, or until it's brought back off the table via motion. That being said, we'll move on to the next item, but we will need to get the chair back in. Okay, so you've heard,
I heard get the chair back in.
the last item was tabled,
Okay,
so we'll have a discussion later in the meeting.
okay. All right, well then, I guess the next one we wanted to discuss a little bit is the project to improve Clemente Park, which is also seeking funding as well, it says open space, but recreation project primarily. Do we have any discussion on that particular?
When you were out in the hallway, I informed the CPC that the DPD applied for $500,000 to CDBG for improvements to this park. And the activities listed in their CPA application are in the CDBG application. And the CAC is set to meet in a couple of weeks.
Alphabet soup here, right?
Yes.
Okay, so is that a suggestion that that would be the more appropriate way of funding this project for now, and we should talk about another one, or do we still want to discuss this?
That is my opinion, but I don't believe other members share that, so.
I'd like to see if the Clemente Park Committee have some kind of input in terms of the applicants. I mean, your application, because they might have, additional ideas in terms of fixing the parks, but at the same time, a partnership with them, because they are the applicant here. And we can't just say, oh, we already, getting some money to fix this and you're good to go. But, what kind of input or what kind of, additional opinion based on the project that they might have in terms of complement each other.
Thank you. So we're a planning department, and we take our pride in our community outreach. So I do know the two planners have been in touch with the Clemente Park Group, and I've seen the preliminary plan that our project manager has put together. And while the drawings that she put together were not a part of the application, we would absolutely work with this group throughout the project. And as I mentioned, the activities in this application are included in the overall ideas we have for the park. Improvements that we've discussed about the park. We actually have already purchased the roof for the bocce court, and so we'll be putting out to bid the installation, so that's happening this year. The resurfacing of the fields, the volleyball courts, also improvements to it's like a meditation prayer area, in addition to playground equipment. And then there's longer-term goals about how to expand the park potentially, and then improvements to the playground equipment, and then also benches. There is fencing around one of the courts that limits the access to the skate park, so I do think there's improvements to the skate park. So while I take your comments to heart, I mean, the DPD would work very closely with with all of the neighborhood and the groups. And so there would be input throughout the process.
Yes, thank you. I come from the community, and I just, want to make sure that, what I guess is what you're trying to do is basically more than what they're asking for. So I just want to make sure that, they're connecting, working together so that it's more complement, and at the same time, they are in the community and they can help outreach more in terms of partnership and doing the work with the community. Thank you.
Do we have other comments on this?
I just wanted to share, Adam, because we had the conversation previously, that my only hesitation, I think it's fabulous that there's a $500,000 grant out for this project, but I was curious about the likelihood of receiving those funds and the timeline for receiving those funds and when the project could be implemented, because we could distribute the funds in a short timeline and potentially get the $100,000 worth of improvements this year, and I just wasn't sure about how long the other improvements would take.
Was there a response on? Not yet. Not yet. I mean, I have some familiarity with the CDBG process here too, and in both cases, there's a committee that makes our case as well as the CDBG has a committee as well. And in both cases, we and they are making recommendations to the city council that then decides to appropriate the funds. So in the end, the question really is up to, is this a project that the city council wants to fund? And then the subsequent question is, which pot of money, or both, do they want to apply to it? So they likely will be on somewhat similar timelines as well, because by the time we submit our recommendations to the city council and they take action on it, that's probably not too different than the timeline when the CDBG committee is making its recommendations. And either way, you'd probably be in about the same position to be able to start thinking about planning and execution of a project. I'm not saying that biased one way or the other about which pot of money should be used, and ultimately that, I think, is really up to the city council, I guess, but.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
That says to me that we absolutely shouldn't be relying on another board to make the right decision in funding this park. I think we absolutely need to give them their full ask if we feel that it's going to be paid for one way or another from a board like ours, but not ours, right? We can't do that. So I would recommend funding in entirety.
Okay. I guess a procedural question that probably we should have started with, but is the committee interested in sort of taking positive or negative action or partial funding recommendations on each project one at a time? Or would it make sense to have a little bit of a discussion about all of them and then come back and start making more collective action on, we'd like to support this series of projects? Or
So while you were out of the room,
Yep.
we chose to table and come back to it later after we had more substantive discussions about other projects.
all right, well, let's keep that going then. Okay. Then I think, is there anything else anyone wants to say right now about that one before we move to the next? All right, we've obviously discussed and have supported the protecting Rowley's Farm. The next project on our list after that is the 555 Merrimack Street, which is largely a community housing application with a very small open space component, which, do we know if that one is open space or recreation? I mean, at that level, it's probably not going to make a huge difference one way or the other, but,
I believe it's open space.
okay. Do we have, anyone have any comments on this one?
So I will say that one of my concerns about this one is that the project appears to be close to or at fully funded, and this was supposed to be the kind of 10% reserve. And that given the volume of asks that we have, I'm just hesitant to have a large chunk of funds go to a project that feels like it's already paid for. That's so that, you know, not saying that the project is not a great project. I feel like, given our budget, I'd prefer to fund projects that have a demonstrated a gap, or are demonstrating a new project that they're putting forward, as opposed to projects that are already paid for and funded and they're looking for. But that's my just 2 cents.
Not only that, but we have a cost, dollars per affordable unit created. I feel like that's a really effective way to gauge this whole, this whole bracket. And that ratio is pretty low on this project.
Okay. Any other comment on this one?
This is also going to be really tough for me as well, just because, I mean, it's right in the Acre neighborhood, and it needed a lot of support in a way. I mean, at least look at the open space where, the walkway and the improvement of the canal, and see how that can help open access and maybe bringing in, I don't know, some kind of, I don't know, I'm just looking enhanced sort of financial development, through this different connection of the canal and everything else. But either way, it's just hard because, I mean, especially housing and development in a poor neighborhood, so it's a hard decision. But I do think that, Member Seiko's, is correct in a way that, if it's already mostly, acquired funds or, almost completion, I mean, it's sort of like push it back into the back burner a little bit. But I just don't want to make sure that it's all the pieces are connect. Maybe the big chunk is also complete, but how about those little roadway and canal that they're asking for? At least maybe looking at funding the open space section or a certain section that we can support them with as a city.
I'm in support of this project. I think that the mission of the project is in line with our CPA and the CPC that we outlined for the city. And I think that it just there's a high need in Lowell, and I was in support of this project, both the community housing and the open space.
Okay.
I also just wanted to add that I thought when the applicant made their presentation, they shared that they leveraged a lot of different funds, and so this was just one more fund that they were leveraging, but it was really across the board, we're leveraging many funds. And so when you look at the total project costs and the amount that they were asking for, I thought that was also in line with our goals.
Okay. Do we have any comments from the folks who've joined by Zoom, the members who are on by Zoom on this one?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I did like this project. I mean, community housing, as an architect, I mean, that work I see is being very important, and yeah, I understand that there's a lot of funds in it, but yeah, I mean, if we could fund, whatever we could do to help them get over the hurdle, I think that would be worthwhile. So yeah, I mean, I would be in favor of allocating some funds to this project.
Okay. Well, I guess in keeping with our theme here, it's very good comments. Let's move to the next one, and then we'll come again, circle back and be in the more difficult position of comparing projects. So the next one is CTI, A Place to Live, which is also seeking community housing funding.
I think, let me go stand outside for this one just because I'm on the board.
Okay. It's a great hallway.
Yes.
Have you all been silenced?
I'll just say for this application, I do think it's a very small ask, and it's really important to note that this is for pre-development costs, and so I do know that I do understand that we're running the risk that the units will not be created. But the goal of this application is to figure out permanent supportive housing for unhoused individuals in the city. And a couple of years ago, the city manager created a task force on homelessness and sustainable housing with a list of recommendations. We have been able to do a lot of great things as a result of that task force. And we have a coordinating council. We have a director of homelessness initiatives, which we're currently hiring for. But the creation of permanent supportive housing for unhoused individuals is the hardest thing that we've had to do. And so any application, and CTI, I will just say, has been trying and trying and trying and trying. And so any application to support that, we maintain a by name list. We have 200 unhoused individuals that we're aware of in the city. And we are in winter protocol earlier on this week and are at the end of this week, and we have about 85 people sleeping outside in these freezing temperatures. And so anything we can do to support the creation of permanent supportive housing, especially with CTI, I am 100% on board for.
Thank you. I did want to also clarify, for those who may not have heard this when we last discussed this application or heard from the applicant, we did ask the question of what happens in the event that the project does not move forward. And there is no obligation under the CPA to refund the money. So we are not putting CTI, I guess we could choose to, it's up to us, but we're not obligated to put them in a difficult position of taking on the risk of having to refund the money if they can't execute the project in the end. We are allowed under the CPA to fund pre-development, knowing that there is the possibility that some circumstances beyond our control might prevent it from being able to move forward. But we also obviously need to we're trying to prioritize actually creating units too, so.
I agree with Christine's thoughts entirely and fully support this project.
I'm in support of the project as well.
I'm also in support of this project for the reasons Christine outlined. Also, I think with our outreach, community housing was the greatest need, and also housing the homeless was the greatest need. So I'm in support of this project.
Any other comments? All right.
Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman.
Member Shea?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just noticed in the notes the estimated completion date would be 10 months after permitting. Could you just educate me a little bit on how long it would take for permitting?
Well, this one appears to be one where that will be a fairly unique process. And that's actually something, in light of the earlier discussion of the fact that this is pre-development money, one of the risks associated with this particular project is that the property is currently zoned in a manner that does not allow this use. But there is discussion, I guess research currently, about whether the project would qualify under the Dover Amendment, which would allow the use anywhere. And there is also discussion of whether they might submit for a comprehensive permit under Chapter 40B, which would allow them to bypass the zoning restrictions, provided that the zoning board agreed with that. And there would not, because Lowell has sufficient affordable housing under the 40B threshold, there would not be an appeal right if the zoning board did not support that. So that is a potential risk with this particular project. But I think we obviously heard some pretty strong support from the city for this, so I would presume that might translate to the permitting process as well.
Thank you for the information. I appreciate it.
I just wanted to reiterate my support for the reasons stated earlier.
Okay. Member Liang, if you want to return, if you can hear us. Okay. While we're gathering him, the The next project that's before us for discussion is the Acre Crossing project, which is also a community housing project.
I really like this project. I think this site has been vacant for a very long time, and pre-COVID and a previous position that I held with the city, there was a very volatile permitting process for a use that, the planning board and the city felt that was not appropriate, and I personally agree. And I think that this is a unique opportunity to provide affordable housing for purchase, which is not something that we typically fund with our federal funding in Lowell. It's usually, we do have first-time homebuyer assistance, don't get me wrong, but and I know there is going to be a affordability restriction for a number of years that I'm sure we'll have to discuss and decide on. But I think one of the unique parts about this project is, one, it's an important redevelopment project in a vacant site in the Acre neighborhood. But two, that there is an opportunity to create wealth in low-income families, and that's a big gap that we talk about a lot. And so I'm supportive of this project, and I would like to fund it as much as we can, understanding that there is competing interest for other housing. But it's an opportunity to redevelop vacant, unused, highly underutilized property in an area of the city that, and it's home ownership, which I like too.
Thank you. Other comments from members about this one?
Yeah, I share similar sentiments. I think the home ownership aspect is important. And so yes, I am in favor of funding this project.
And I think this also is taking an alphabet soup of funding to get, and I do think that if we were to fund this project, they could leverage and use these funding as a match to go as a match requirement for a bigger grant to help fund this project. So I think that's important for the board to know as well.
Any other member comments on this one?
Mr. Chairman,
Yep.
I'd like to go on record in favor of this project also. I think it's going to be a tremendous asset for that neighborhood, and it's going to be a big improvement over what we have. I'm in favor of it. Thank you.
I just wanted to kind of throw my 2 cents in. I agree. I think this project is a kind of a really not only needed, but also an important redevelopment project in the city. And the ability to, as Member McCall mentioned, to get home ownership for low-income families is the kind of a transformative project that I think we should be looking for when we're talking about housing, working on community housing, is that type of change that we could as a board attempt to leverage our funds to do. So I think I'm in support of this project.
Yeah, I'm in favor of supporting this. I was here when when the permit thing was that Member McCall was mentioning, and I do agree that especially when they can set aside and people can provide a home that can be affordable, and those are something that in line for me. And I know this is a complete change from a previous issues a long time ago, but I do favor in terms of funding as much as we can to support this project.
No questions from that end of the table? Okay. Thank you all. So our next one to discuss is the 1 Plus Lowell Community Housing Initiative from the Merrimack Valley Housing Partnership. Do you have any comments on this one?
For all the reasons that we talked about home ownership in the last project, this is an even more effective way to benefit these potential homeowners. This is not something that goes into development and construction. This is something that goes directly towards the loans of these first-time home buyers. So I would like to fund this project in its entirety.
I have a question for the board to contemplate here, which I'm wrestling a little bit with the relationship between the one we just discussed and this one, because actually both of them held up the Acre Crossing project as a place that funds might be used to assist first-time homebuyers, and there was some indication that if homebuyers were able to access one, they might not need the other. There's also some possibility of layering, and I think we just need to think about, when we're thinking about the full picture, deciding whether that's maybe a good thing that there's two programs available to support people in that project. Maybe it's an embarrassment of riches, and we need to spread the money around more broadly. But it did seem that they were each almost seeking to solve a similar problem at the same site. And we should probably think about that a little bit.
I like the 1+ Lowell program idea, but I do like the idea of, the Acre Crossing is a definitive project that's fully permitted. So if we put money into this and they can leverage it, use these funds as a matching grant to leverage more funds to ensure that it gets constructed, just knowing the cost of everything. I understand your concerns, and so if the board didn't want to layer the two or have them double, is that something we could say you can't do? Like, if we fund 1+ Lowell, Acre Crossing could, and we fund Acre Crossing.
I would
we
think so.
separate them, that way
Yeah.
it's not in one site, but we're spreading it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we might not want to do that, but yes,
Yes, we might not want to.
I think
if
we'd
we
have
did
the
that.
ability to, and it's, of course, again, remember, we're recommending. The city council doesn't have to accept our recommendation, I don't think, in that case. I mean,
Right.
so. Although I don't know that if we endorse, I'm not saying we should, but if we were to endorse that we want to fund 1 Lowell, except you can't use the money at this address because we're also funding this other project, I think the city council has to say either they agree with that recommendation or send it back to us. I don't think they can say, no, we want to fund both without the restriction, I believe. So we just, as we're thinking about what we may want to say, I think we have to think of it in those terms.
The one thing I would say about this 1+ Lowell project, and this is a good thing, I think, is that my read on the way that the Merrimack Valley Housing Partnership put this project forward is this would be our first installment of a support for a project that would go on for many years and likely impact many more people as obviously we'd be making more decisions every year to whether we're going to continue funding, but whereas Acre Crossing I think is important because of the development and its location and what it can do for that neighborhood. I think that the 1+ Lowell, the benefit of that is that it's going to be spread around across the city, and it's going to be enable kind of hopefully a rising tide to go throughout the neighborhoods and not have all of the funding end up in one block. So I think that's
Yeah, I think actually, I think in this case, and I think we have one other coming up later, it's also worth considering investing in seeding programs this year when we actually have, even though it's going to be a difficult decision, we have through more than 3 times the money we're likely going to have in future years. And at that point, it may be very difficult to invest in programs. This is probably the year that we can launch programs like this much more easily than in future years.
Especially a program that has such success enough to be warranted as a second city project.
Mm-hmm.
I may be forgetting, I mean, are we thinking about installment type of kind of support or funding? I mean, in terms like this year we provided this much and next year we provide this much, will they go for that, or Are we thinking,
We do have that ability if we want to make that type of a recommendation, and that also is true with these, particularly with these ones that are a program as
Right,
opposed to a project that has a gap right now.
yeah, I like
that is a
the
possibility.
idea, because I mean, this is a good program, and one way of sustaining it is to, build that relationship ongoing. I mean,
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to say, I think Acre Crossing was willing to accept money year over year, and I believe One Plus Lowell admitted that they would be applying no matter what they gave us every year. So even if we say, oh, we're only giving you even if we gave them 500 this year, they'll be back next year. Whereas Acre, you know what I mean? Like, whereas Acre Crossing, this is one project, and once it's constructed. So I just said something I think we just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, the Merrimack Valley Housing Partnership has a long history of asking the city for support and then doing wonderful things with the money when they get it. So it's. Any other comments on this one? Okay. So the remaining projects we have before us are historic preservation projects, which we have quite a lot of. The first one is the 1827 bell and wheel repair at the First United Baptist Church, which is the smallest request we have this year, to their credit.
I think because of that, I want to give it to them, because I feel like this is the reason why we have, you know what I mean? It's a small
I agree.
ask.
yeah, I like projects like these. It's
Yep.
gonna get fixed, and it's gonna be there, and it's a small amount of money. So I'm all in favor for that.
Whereas our other asks, I think to Adam's member Banky's point about this year being an unprecedented year about seeding programs, there is in the next chunk an opportunity to seed a program which all the other applicants could then go to. So, but whereas this Bell project would not.
Would
And
not go to
so
that. Yeah, that's true.
That's how I.
For $12,000 for a historic preservation restriction is absolutely a good price.
Yep.
So.
So I don't know, I know we're tabling things, but we did take the Rowley Farm vote, so I don't know if we're really all that unanimous. If no one minds, I'll make a motion to fund the $12,000 bell and wheel repair.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, can we have a roll call on the motion?
Chairman Bakey,
Yes.
Vice Chair Slagle,
Yes.
Member Butenheis,
Yes.
Member Gallivan,
No.
Member McCall,
Yes.
Member Liang,
Yes.
Member DePesa,
Yes.
Member Shea.
Yes,
That motion carries. So, presume you've got a spreadsheet over there somewhere, Dylan? You don't want to plug that first, or that $12,000 into it? Our next request is for historic preservation of the historic Derby building at Middlesex Community College. We have discussion on that one.
So I'd consider a partial fund this year, but I could go either way. Downtown, buildings of an applicant of the size of Middlesex is something that I'm going to struggle with putting money into.
Other comments?
I agree with Member Budenheis. I think that one of the things that I think that we as a committee are going to struggle with, probably not just this year but every year, is in the city of the vintage of Lowell, there's going to be historic preservation asks. They are not cheap, and I think our toughest decisions are going to be in deciding which ones to fund and which ones we need to pass on. And I feel like, not to knock our local colleges and universities, but that I feel like I would prefer to have them seek internal funding sources or state funding sources before coming to the CPA. That would be my thought.
Other comments, if any?
I agree. Don't have
Okay.
anything else to add.
All right, then our next proposal is from Girls Inc. For property on Worthen Street. Do you have any discussion or comments on this one?
I'm not interested in making a reimbursement on a purchase that was previously made.
I was thinking the same way. There's a few items that was in my head when we start looking at the project, and I mean, reimbursement is not on the top of my list as well. It's just hard for me to look at it. We've already reimbursed well other projects that needed funds right now, right away.
Any other comments? All right. Our next application is the Downtown Lowell Building Restoration Fund from the Lowell Development and Financial Corporation.
I have to say, this is a unique application, and I like the proposed conditions, and I do think it's a unique opportunity to seed a pool of funding that could leverage a lot of other dollars from our banking institutions. The DPD has a great relationship with the Lowell Plan and the LDFC, and I think, seeding a program like this, we could see, it could leverage a lot of investment in the downtown that far exceeds the applications that are in front of us. So I am very supportive of funding this project. I don't know how, I'd be open to doing all or a portion depending on how it all shakes out. But I like this project, and I think it could help with a lot of long-term goals downtown.
Yeah, I do agree with this. I mean, to me, it's unique, but it's important. I'd like to know, was there any kind of research done in terms of, CPA funding toward this kind of project before? Or, I mean, this is really nice, and I like the organizational behind it as well. So, I really want to fund this kind of things. But I just would like to know, have you done any research, just like you've done with the bonding before?
Well, I think that both Adam and Dylan and myself were involved in correspondence with the Community Preservation Coalition, specifically with respect to the proposed conditions that you see under J came out of the conversations that we had with the Community Preservation Coalition, but also H, where the loan loss reserve fund aspect of the application they believe would not be eligible for CPA funding. So that was my memory is that was half of the ask. So they asked for $500,000 towards the loan loss reserve fund, and that would not be eligible for us to fund. So I think this is a great project, and I would love to see us figure out a way to fund it. I think the real question is, what does that funding mean? I mean, I think if they're asking for $1 million from us, but we know that $500,000 what they're asking we can't fund, are we just asking for $500,000? And they indicated that phasing would be possible, but does that mean I'm a little bit concerned about what does fully funding it mean if we can't give them half of the money that they're asking for. That's
Yeah, my impression, I also think this is very much the year to support this kind of a project, and I think the other applications that we've seen actually are the strongest argument for why we should support this project. Because they are just the tip of the iceberg, because I don't believe that many of the downtown property owners are even aware of the availability of the Community Preservation Act as a tool to help with historic preservation. But I think there is a lot of potential demand. However, for projects that are largely recoverable through equity in the property, in the real estate, the idea that funding might be through loan on very favorable terms, which is what the LDFC program would offer, actually makes a lot of sense, as opposed to necessarily tying up our limited funds with a grant. So that makes this very, very attractive. I think the other thing that makes this very, very attractive is frankly exactly what Member McCall was saying, which is they are proposing to leverage a lot of private money. And the key here is we're using a little bit of our money to make a lot of other people's money go to the purposes that this program exists for, and that's also quite attractive. I do agree they have asked for $500,000 for something that isn't eligible, so I'm not so sure we can fund that now. But we have the ability to, this is one probably very similar to the one Lowell program we were talking about earlier, where we may see them again. But that would be a good thing, potentially, because in each case, it would be an indication that the program is well subscribed and doing what it's supposed to, and they need more money to do that. So that is, I think, definitely an opportunity. We have something we can consider. I'm not advocating this, especially given how much interest there is in our program, but I think we have the ability to consider reserving money. So one way to reconcile the concern that Member Slagle raised, if there was a desire to commit $1 million toward this effort, they have asked for $500,000 for something that is eligible, and they have asked for $500,000 that's not. We could commit the $500,000, and we could also reserve some amount for a future request in a future year for this program if it's successful. I'm not saying that's something we want to do, but that is an option available to us, I think, to if we want to support more than the $500,000 that's definitely eligible.
So they do say that they could take phase funding, with year one being $500,000. Obviously, this is the kind of program that the more money we give them, the more money they will make out of it. You know, the more widespread benefit that this downtown area will get from it. I do trust in this group wholeheartedly to make those dollars count more than they would on any other project. I feel like this fits into a yes, and we will fund it the best we possibly can, being slightly under the top tier, absolutely full funded projects that we've talked about. There's gonna have to be some of those projects where, you know, there's gonna be 2 or 3 that kind of, we say, you know, let's fund them all at 70%, you know, at the end of this. And I don't know how that's exactly gonna shake out, because we all got some math to do probably. But that's where I would classify this one.
Okay. We have other comments on this one? Okay. Our next project is the City Hall stained glass restoration, which I know we started the conversation on in the bonding discussion, but actually I think we were talking more about the bonding and the numbers than we were the merits of the project, so we should have the discussion about the merits of the project as well here.
Sure. So I talked about this a little bit before, but I have seen the both sides of this issue, which is to say, I used to have an office up in the law department. One of the stained glass windows is in that office that used to be in the balcony of the old chambers on the other side of the building. It leaked like a sieve and ruined everything under it because the stained glass is in such bad shape. There was a capital request that was put forward 5 or 6 years ago to fully repair all of the stained glass windows in City Hall. It was $250,000. That same company has come forward, and the cost now is $473,000. It is not going to get cheaper to do this. As I mentioned, this is a different, in my mind, this is different from a lot of these other asks because it's a city building, and one of the CPA plan goals is the restoration of historic city buildings. And we know that the city's going to be in this building long into the future. Certainly, I mean, one of the reasons why I suggested bonding is we know that the city's going to own this building for at least another 20 years. And so bonding something like this and just paying a small, $30,000 every year towards it is, in my mind, a way to get this fully funded before the costs continue to rise. and still not take away from the funds that I think we all see are going to be stretched thin funding the projects that we have this year. So that was my thoughts on that project.
I agree with Eric. I think I've really, now especially that we've made some decisions on certain projects, I think that bonding this project makes a lot of sense, and especially with the high need that we have in the entire packet that we have tonight, that I think it would be nice to be able to bond that because it's a long-term asset for the city, so that we could make other funds available to other projects tonight or this month.
I do agree both. One is that the building it needs some support in terms of fixing this and that. For me, it's the clock is keep annoying the hell out of me every day. But I like the idea of also bonding, where we could save some money to support other projects as well. So this is a plus for me.
Yeah, I agree. We should support this project for those reasons as well.
Any other comments on this one?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes?
I'd like to also add my support to this, this motion, this idea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next one before us is 80 Gorham Street structural facade restoration. Any comments on this one? This is the last one to discuss tonight. So,
This is a great project. This block has been vacant and falling apart, has had half X's, full X's. And for those who don't know, when there's a red X and there's an emergency, the fire department will not go in. And I think this is a beautiful block, and the applicant is taking on a huge project, and he has the SCAP, and however we can fund it would be great. Or if there, I know when we talked about, it's an unprecedented year for seeding programs, and I think this is obviously would be eligible under that program. So if that's how we decided to go, I would love to just be able to say I highly recommend that this project be approved through that program, because I think it could be quite transformative in that area of the downtown to see these buildings, well, this one building, but he is doing 2 on that block come to life, and it's fully permitted. So I believe the funding would be spent almost as soon as he received it.
okay. Other comments on this one?
I'm in support of fully funding this project tonight with CPC funds, especially for the reason that Christine mentioned of the kind of the immediacy of this project. And I think the demonstration to get this project completed in a timeline that would be by, I think, this fall that he mentioned. So I'm in full support of this project.
Yeah, I'm in support of this project as well. Yeah, I think it's, again, I mean, that block, it is a good block and a very nice area. And yeah, this building could be really restored. It would be great for that community.
I do support this as well, because I mean, the presenter who came in, he showed he know what he's doing. He probably gonna make Lowell look a better place, So I trust this project, and I think if we can support the whole thing, we can support the whole thing. But I do agree that we should support this project.
I just want to throw my thoughts in. I've been in the unique position of having the building commissioner who was in this building talk to me about it, and the task that this developer is taking on to restore it is pretty impressive. And so I feel like I feel like it's important for us as a committee to support this type of redevelopment where you've got a single developer who's coming in and kind of putting their neck on the line for one of the city's needy properties, and willing to try to work to restore it. So I think it's a good project.
I have two thoughts to contribute on this one, which are, I think, one that I actually think that this is it may not appear in its current condition, but this is a really significant building. It is one of the oldest remaining buildings in the downtown, and as such, it is a particularly unique asset. When we were having the discussions with the Community Preservation Coalition about the eligibility of the loan program that we were just discussing, one of the things that they strongly emphasized was the importance of for historic preservation projects, finding that it was truly a significant building, not just an old building. So I think that's something we should be thinking about. The other thing I think we should be thinking about, which is almost a counter position in some respects, is that this is a for-profit developer. And we should be, our program is really, it's about community preservation and community benefit. And there is obviously a community benefit to preserving a landmark building. There is also a private benefit in this case, and we should just be thinking about the precedent that we may be setting and whether that's important or not. It may not be an issue, but do we have a concern at all, or a perspective, I guess, and concern may be even too biased of a term, but a perspective about how we want to handle properties that are owned by entities that are not community oriented, and that's municipal entities and nonprofits with a community mission sort of are in a different category than private developers. And that just, again, I don't have a conclusion. I just want to make sure we're thinking about that as we're making our recommendations.
It would be lovely to be able to have this project done by the winter, but on the other hand, we are using funds which can be used for the common good and handing them directly to somebody who will, at the end of the day, still make money on this property. And they will do that whether or not we give them this money. It may take them longer, but this project, with the investment that's already been made on it, will get finished at some time. This is not a project which will be halted if we do not fund it. For us to hand over $200,000 to somebody who's in the business of selecting which properties he's going to develop because he will make money off of them would be foolish.
I did think about that as well when I circled the residential area where, I mean, you're right, I mean, for less than $200,000, the benefit of preserving this, area, this building is outweighed. I mean, I think the little bit of the additional, I think more of a commercial kind of thing. But I'm in support of the balance, the weight of the good, and then a little bit of the other one. But that's why I said, well, I support this just because, with that little amount of money, he can do a lot. And like I said, from his presentation and his experience, I do agree that he will make the best use of this, this money.
Another option, Member McCall hinted at it, which is if we were to support the LDFC's program, that could be a logical vehicle for a property like this. A variation on that is a combination. So it is also possible that if the committee feels strongly about this project or some in the future, let's say that LDFC program does exist, we could always feel as a committee that there should be some grant money from the program, and if they want to close the gap between whatever the program feels it can afford and whatever their ask is, they could go to the LDFC program, and that is another possibility. Now, at some point, if the amount is so small, it's not worth the complication of taking out a loan, but that may be an option for us to consider as well. Any other comments on this particular application?
I think that the LDFC is much better positioned to look at the benefit to downtown as a whole of this money coming from them instead of us.
Okay. So how do we want to proceed? I think we have a range of possibilities here. I think there've been some really good observations about the projects. We could attempt to look at sort of where we stand with respect to the general feeling that was expressed. we could pick that up in 2 weeks at the next meeting. Or we could now go back through and say more specifically with each of them, let's propose an initial amount for each of them or an initial position on each of them and start making a list and then compare how that aligns with the available funds. I'm open to a variety of possibilities, but I want to make sure we're doing something a process that works for everybody.
Well, I guess what I'd like to do is, I think just based on what I heard from folks, with the permission of the chair, I'd like to make a motion to fully fund the city stained glass restoration on a 20-year bond.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay. Discussion on that motion. Hearing none, roll call.
Chairman Bakey,
Yes.
Vice Chair Slagle,
Yes.
Member Butenheis,
Yes.
Member Gallivan,
Yes.
Member McCall,
Yes.
Member Liang,
Yes.
Member DePesa,
Yes.
Member Shea,
Yes,
So I got
Okay, that motion carries.
we funded everything that we've talked
So we're down to
about, $40,000 over our total.
10 projects that we need to discuss because we have agreed to bond for 2 and we have funded the $12,000 request for the other one. So we have the remaining 10. I feel a little awkward about how to handle the first one, but let me table that as you did, since I can't really participate in that one. I think we heard, I'll try to summarize what I think we heard, and maybe we can create a sort of straw proposal that I'm sure will be over budget, and then we can figure out how we're going to get it back on budget. Does that seem like a plan?
Might have helped us more than
Maybe.
you'd think.
Well, we'll see. That would be great. That would be a nice outcome. So I think we heard with Clemente Park, there was a little bit of a mixed opinion, but there was a desire to support the project. So why don't we initially put it on the list at the level they asked? Yeah, we really do. We need like that, yeah. I'm looking to,
Putting it in my calculator as
all right,
we're doing
I was looking to, Dylan, are you recording do you have like a spreadsheet set up to track this, or?
not in front of me.
Oh, all right, so we need to actually write this down then, all right.
Yeah.
So Clemente Park, 110, okay. Heard mixed things about the 555 Merrimack Street. I heard close to consensus around supporting the $27,000 request, but I think a pretty balanced pro and con on the housing. Is that just a fair characterization of the conversation at least? So do we want to put the 27 on the definite, at least, well, for now? All this is for now, because till we're over. Does that part seem,
I like the sound of that.
all right?
Me too.
And then the housing, do we want to, I guess maybe we treat this as sort of a yes, no, maybe to start, and that sounded like a maybe, is that?
I
I've
think
got
that's a fair characterization.
I've got it down as somewhere between $0 and $473,000.
All right, that sounds like a maybe. All right, CTI, a place to live. I heard pretty broad support for this. Do we want to put that in the yes at this point?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Then Acre Crossing, also heard a lot of support for the project. Pretty large request that the applicant acknowledged a willingness to split it over multiple years. Do we want to maybe start by saying half this year, half next, and see what it looks like? Or do we want to go something a little different than that?
I was actually going to just suggest maybe 500,000 this year, and possibly the remainder next year.
Okay. Is everybody okay with that for now? Recognizing that we're probably going to revisit a lot of this?
Mm-hmm.
That's fine.
All right. 1+ Lowell. I think I heard pretty broad interest in supporting this one as well. Do we want to put the whole 5,100 in the yes for now? Any opposition to that?
Nope.
Okay. The Bell and Wheel, we've already agreed to support. And that does count against this year's money, unlike the bonds. But I don't think it's going to change the outcome.
We're at that point, I think we can handle it.
Yeah, we'll figure it out, right? On the Historic Derby building, I did not hear the same level of support. You know, I do have to acknowledge, as somebody who works for a institution, a public higher ed institution, state funding is not really flowing in great amounts. So if the decision to not support this is because we think there is a big pot of state money that they just need to use, that really isn't actually true. Now, there may be other reasons to not support this, but that's probably not a very good one. However, nonetheless, I did not hear a lot of support for this project, so I think this is maybe not in the yes project category right now. Is that,
I think that's fair.
do we want to put it in the maybe, or do we, is that where it wants to be now, or?
Let's put it in the no
Okay.
now and see where we are at the end.
Okay. Girls Inc., I actually didn't hear any support for this one, so I guess, is that a no? Okay.
Although I think we should recommend that they go to
The LDFC?
the LDFC.
Yep. Well, we're getting to that. We haven't funded that yet.
If we fund it. If it exists, this is where you should go.
That's why we're funding it, right?
Yep.
We think everybody should go there.
All right, well, it's up next, so. So I think the LDFC, we've talked about that basically 500,000 of their request is eligible. So do we want to put the 500,000 in the yes right
I
now?
think I should put that in the yes.
And then we can potentially reserve funding for a future application, or we can wait and see.
Yeah.
All right. And then the stained glass we just voted on, so then 80 Gorham Street is the remaining project, and this one I heard a lot of support for as well. I think, we discussed whether this belongs with the LDFC program or whether it belongs with this program, but either way, it should be supported. So the question is, should it go in the yes, or should it go somewhere else right
Why
now?
don't let's start it in the yes, because
Okay.
I think I heard the majority of folks say yes, and then obviously I think that's one that, if we get down to the
All right.
nitty gritty, referring to the LDFC might.
So then, 1.5, 1.7.
I've got three projects that we're looking at a range of values. It's the community housing portion of CBA's.
Yep.
Number 6 is Acre Crossing.
Yep.
And then 80 Gorham Street, number 13 in historic preservation.
So
Okay.
so this is my math so far.
Yep.
Based on fully funding Clemente, 27,000 for
CBA.
CBA, fully funding the CTI ask, 500,000 for Acre Crossing this year, 500,000 for One Plus Lowell this year, the Bell, 500,000 for the LDFC, and fully funding the Gorham Street.
Yep.
I have us at $100 less than 1.9 million.
Okay, so 1.9 million.
1899900.
Okay.
And so
And
that would, understanding that of our funds, since we used 27,000 for open space, we've got about 233,000 of our remaining funds has to be used for open space, and we don't have an open space project necessarily to give to it.
Okay. And the two that we borrowed, just to be confirm this, I think we discussed the two that we would be borrowing against, we would not be, or borrowing for, no money hits this year.
No money this
It
year.
doesn't hit till next year.
First payment doesn't happen until 1 year after the bond issuance.
Right, so if that's the case, then we have basically, what do we have, just shy of 400,000 left to allocate to,
2.31. Yeah, so we've got $400,000 left.
and we have a 473,000 of request for 555 Merrimack Street, and we have the balance of the Acre Crossing request at 263. You know, I have to say, I would feel a little bit awkward fully funding that one and not funding the one across the street at all. So the CBA one being right more or less across the street from it. So I would say we should probably be looking, given that we're already giving 500,000 to the Acre Crossing, we should probably look at doing something for the housing part of the CBA one before we do more for the Acre Crossing project, which
Oh,
would
yeah.
make it the
I think they
most
would
generous commitment we made.
My personal feeling is, because Acre Crossing indicated that they were willing to do phased funding,
Mhm.
if we fund them at $500,000 now,
Ask them to come back.
and ask them to come back next year, we don't have to spend all of the rest of this 400,000, it'll roll over into the reserve.
That's true too.
And then whatever amount we have left, we'll add on to the approximately,
So we have
900,000.
400 left to allocate?
But some of it's in open space.
well, no, that's after,
No,
that's
this is
not,
after the
we have 400,000 that's not open space left. to
Right,
allocate.
so we've,
I didn't.
at
I
this
was checking
point,
that.
Yeah.
we've basically committed, none of this is final, but we've proposed to commit 1.9 million. We are required to reserve another 236,000 because it's for open space, and
Right.
there's nothing else that we are proposing here that's open space, other than the 27,000 here. So that leaves, out of the money we have available to us right now, about 400,000 that we could allocate to other things.
So,
And we didn't, I apologize, we didn't discuss the one that I'm not supposed to be part of.
Right.
well,
So
that was my follow-up question,
I'm gonna
and for
let
anyone
Cheryl
else
speak to that one.
but the chair to answer, is, so any funding if we were to grant funding to the Whistler House, is that open space, or is it recreation?
I think we made the determination, based on the lack of a CR on the property, that we could, in theory, give open space money if they were willing to get a CR and prove to us that the CR was the value of the amount that we were giving.
Okay. But, so we could not touch the 236 and allocate them something out of the 400 and just skip the CR conversation altogether?
We could.
So can we split what's left between CBA and, fund CBA, not the full ask, but maybe 300, and then allocate the 170, whatever's remaining, to Whistler House? So that we're giving something, because we all seem to agree that the right far-hand portion of the property needs some immediate attention, and then they will need to come back after construction, which is not happening this year. And just based on what Member Butenheis was saying, irrigation, trees, that's costly. And so being able to allocate them at least, I think, 100,000 would, I think, without a line item budget in front of us, help with some more immediate concerns.
I think that you could probably redecorate that whole right side for $100,000. That sounds reasonable. That's a nice landscaping budget.
And then we skip the CR.
Well, but my thought process is that if we do that, what we're gonna end up with is a pot of money in open space. Whereas if we ask them about the CR and to provide that information to us, we could end up with a pot of money that we could use for anything. So if Acre Crossing comes back next year, we can use that money for them. Whereas if it's all open space money, we're not gonna be able to use it for
Okay.
them next
Can
year.
someone explain to me what you're talking about, the cost of the CR?
It's the
what-
value.
So
In other
yeah,
words,
but
if you have
start from the beginning.
Sure,
for me.
if you have a piece of property and I want to buy a conservation restriction on that, so it can never be built on, that has a value that I can give you
Basically
money.
buying the development rights.
So what is the development rights of that parcel?
So Raleigh's Farm is a perfect example. The CR is $2 million. That's why they're asking for $1.5 million. So they've appraised the property, and so they appraised the property, and so they have a sales price, which is $3 million. But the appraisal for the property is probably, for the CR, which is, because appraisals of property for sale is with the highest and best use, which out there would be single-family home development, whereas a conservation restriction wouldn't be the highest and best use because you can't build on it, so it would be
Yeah.
the value of the land.
The best value of the land
Yes.
compared to the best value of the land if it had its
I'm
house.
sure there's much
Got
more
it.
complicated, but that's a
And
simple
so
way to.
Cool, cool, I
the
understand.
trick
Thank
for
you.
us as a municipality is we can't buy things for more than they're worth. So we can't give somebody $1 million for a conservation restriction that's only worth $100,000. And that's the trick. So
That's the rub.
but I think if we offered them $100,000 contingent on the conservation restriction, and then demonstrating the conservation restriction on the land is worth $100,000, and the park land is worth $100,000, then we could have it come out of the open space money, and we'd still have $400,000 left to spend, or save till next year.
I love the idea of, and we don't have to if we find a perfect use for all these every dollar, but there's going to be different projects and less money next year, and there's going to be just as many projects probably. So
Maybe more.
yeah,
Well, I do like the idea then, because I do think the Acre project is a priority of the city council, and so I know we talked about splitting, but if there's extra money on the table, I want to fully fund that project. And then partially fund CBA, so if there's a way to do that with the remaining.
Well, there is, if, I just quickly, while you all were discussing what I'm not participating in, there is, if we spend everything that we put in the yes column, and we continue to reserve the balance of the open space money, and I'm not saying we are going to, and we did, there is $456,000 more that is available for us to distribute. If the decision of the committee is to support the Whistler House project as an open space project, that will not count against the 456. If the decision of the committee is to support the Whistler House project as a recreation project, it would. But there would, if you're talking about 100,000, that would still be 300 and some thousand that might be available for the other projects. So we have basically 350 to 450 that we could allocate to the combination of 555 Merrimack and further funding Acre Crossing if desired.
I just want to note something. So there, in terms of the funding left, I think that there are closing costs with the bonds. So just something to take into account. Is that correct?
That would be included in the cost of the bond. That wouldn't come out of our money this year. That would be included in the cost of the bond.
You'd finance that.
all right. So the total 2593 minus the open space value is $2,329,000. If we fund Coalition for a Better Acre in its entirety, so 4B, I'm calling it, that's the community housing portion of CBA. So 4B in its entirety, 5 in its entirety, 6 in its entirety, 7 at $500,000, which is its entirety. That's 1 plus Lowell. 8 in its entirety is the bell at the church. 11 at $500,000, which is what we believe to be its entirety, and 13 at its entirety. We are $170,000 over budget, right? So
But that's including,
I think we're over by more than that, but yes, it's
but
that
you're
order of
funding-
magnitude.
You're funding CBA by the extra 473,000. That's
yeah,
the one thing you're adding in that we haven't been talking about before.
yes. I'm just, if we're considering spending every dollar, and CBA seems to be the one on the table that we're considering funding, but aren't really, thinking about funding it in its entirety, then we can just take the difference out of that, and we've fully funded the Acre project, the Acre Crossing project. I think that we've.
So if we fully fund Acre Crossing and then get every other available dollar to the CBA,
We basically give them $300,000.
and then,
No, I don't think that math works. I don't think we have that much money.
well, let me,
What was the number you had, Eric? It was 1.9 million
at one
for the
point,
ones that were in the yes.
yes, 1.9 that was in the yes, that didn't include any for CBA other than the open space, and it didn't included 500 grand for Acre Crossing. So if you
Right.
added in 263, 200, you'd have 2163, 100, and then the amount we had to spend was 2.3.
Yeah, we have we have 2.593 minus,
263,888.
yeah, or times 0.9, right? So 233,000, and we had already committed 1.9 of that. Well, so far, we haven't actually committed. That leaves you,
27,000 in there, there's a little bit that's not accounted for, but
right, well, yeah, add that back in, right, so 27. So that leaves us, basically, it's again that 450, 460
460.
that we have to further
To play
allocate.
with. So if we,
And
263.
If
it
263 of that went to Acre Crossing, 200 would be available then that could go to 555 Merrimack. However, that means that either nothing is going to Whistler House or Whistler House has to be an open space project.
I considered Whistler House as an open space project.
Okay, all right. So then that is an option. You could say 200,000 to the CBA and
I got 300.
about, we'll have to work out the exact numbers here
Yeah.
more carefully, and about 260 for bringing the Acre Crossing to full funding, if that's desired.
All right.
That also leaves us to have a little bit more flexibility with the Whistler House. We don't have to, because then we have 263. So if we wanted to do more than 100, we could.
We
We
could,
probably, we actually
Well,
would have like two.
236.
Yeah.
Yeah, 36. So, but I would be concerned about funding the Whistler House more than 100,000 for fear that if their CR is not worth that much, and we can just, the money will still be there in open space, and they can come back in 6 months or 7 months, whenever we open up the
Yeah.
applications again and ask for that money. It's still going to be sitting there in open space if they've got open space things they can do, and that gives them money now to do the stuff that we've talked about that they might need to do now, but also keeps that money in an open space pot to use in a future year.
So, one more time, right?
All right.
Let's all get on the same page. So the way that I've broken this down is using the numbers from Dylan's package, right? Every number corresponds to its number on his sheet, right? So there's 4 projects in open space, with the last one being 4A. There's 4 projects in community housing, 4B to 7, and then historic preservation is numbers 8 to 13.
Yes.
Agreed.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So for number 1, we have $126,000. That's kind of an odd one because we've talked about pushing it to next year. What that number represents is the balance of the open space maximum with $110,000 on number 2 and $27,000 on 4A.
Well, the
Right,
$110,000 can't come from open space.
Right, that's where I
That's
think our
recreation.
math and our numbers don't.
Can I clarify something?
Oh, there it is.
Yeah,
There's the
there we go.
$100,000.
There we
Good.
go.
Cool, got it. Sick.
All right, at least we found it.
Do we know that that's true?
I'm fairly certain that you can use it's open space and recreation on the Community Preservation Coalition website. So I'm fairly certain that you can use that 10% toward recreation.
But what does the statute say?
Yeah, I disagree,
the
actually.
10%.
Even on their website, I disagree. They characterize them separately. So
I
I know the original statute absolutely prohibited using the open space 10% for anything other than open space, true open space preservation projects. What I don't know is whether the 2012 amendment that made it more flexible about how you could do recreation changed that or not. That's what I don't know. But
I can look into that.
Yeah.
It mentions the amendment to it, so.
we should get that. Maybe what we can, I suppose what we can do, in the interest of maybe not meeting next week or next time, without knowing the answer, which we're not going to definitively know tonight, what I might propose is that we have a scenario where what would we do if the Clemente Park project is not eligible as open space? And then that will leave us, we're pretty certain that will leave us with an open space reserve, potentially.
Yes.
And if we find what would I guess be pretty good news, that it is eligible as an open space project, what would we do with the extra 110,000 after our base recommendations? Is that it? Could that be a way to handle that? Or do we just feel like we would rather have an open space reserve in the future? I guess that's what we could do with it if we wanted, but.
I think it would be a useful tool to figure out the exact amount of money if Clemente Park is not open space and has to come from
Yep.
reserve. What would be the exact amount of money that we would then be giving the CBA? I think, for me at least, I think it would be helpful to know that exact amount. So if you guys don't mind if I just do the math to
Please.
try and sort it out.
More than don't mind.
I have one other reallocation kind of request.
Okay.
Just one other thing that I want to put on the table one more time
Yep.
is that here we have said that we could go with or without funding CBA, but we think it's important based on the other decisions we made, so we're going to fund them a little bit. And then number 13, I felt was also mixed, but for the most part, people did lean to fund that project. Number 13 is what's it called? Sorry.
80 Gorham Street.
Gorham Street,
Yep.
yes. Right now, we're at $200,000 for CBA and $178,000 for Gorham. Where Gorham was probably more, it seemed to get a better reaction. CBA, we're funding less than half of what they requested. Gorham, we're funding the whole thing. Is there a way that we can
Shift some of the
Shift-
78.
shift some of the, try to level the percentage of the ask to what was actually presented at the table? How we felt about the,
How you're calculating what we're funding CBA, are you including that we're fully funding their open space ask?
yes.
Okay.
We certainly can do that. I think the point that Eric made earlier is an important one, which is that I also got the impression that their pro forma is largely funded. Whether or
CBA's?
not we give them this money.
This was all
How about-
contingency.
How about Gorham? They're going to build this thing.
That I actually
way.
feel differently. I actually am not confident that the Gorham, based on what we were hearing, that the Gorham project is fully funded without this money. And actually, I realize I'm going to argue a little bit on both sides of this. Again, I'm getting pretty good at that. What I heard there was a developer who's very concerned about a cost they did not fully anticipate in their model, and they're trying to figure out how to close a gap
Yeah, isn't that the landlord's risk?
from the CB. Well, but it may mean the project doesn't happen.
I think he's sunk way too much money into it to not finish it at this point. For $200,000 to be the difference between all that work that he's already put into it.
Well, he's put in a lot of soft costs so far and
Sure.
a lot of stabilization, but I don't think he's really undertaken the big expenses yet. And I think I got the impression that CBA was treating this as a contingency.
Okay.
They already do have all the money they need to move forward. Now, I support putting some money toward both, and I also continue to feel a little bit I feel pretty strongly about this idea that I'm not really sure we should be prioritizing for-profit projects. But I do think in Lowell, the market doesn't always support for-profit projects
Sure.
just on a purely market basis.
That's fair.
And to achieve projects that we want to see as a community or, as a committee, subsidy is often required. I mean, virtually every project that's been done in downtown Lowell, big or small, the city or the state or the federal government has subsidized it in some way to make it economically viable. So it would not be at all inconsistent that we might be putting a little money in there to close a gap to make it economically viable. That said, part of economically viable is somebody making a profit, or they wouldn't do it. So, yeah, there would be some profit in there. And if that's a problem, if that's something people aren't comfortable with, then that's not something we should be supporting.
Well, hopefully, if he's really up against this bad of an investment, then there won't be, it'll be a break even, right? And so that's what we're doing, is that's the purpose of a pro forma, is determining where that break even is. And theoretically, we have to trust that the number he gave us is that number that allows him to break even, right? So he would have to take a loss if we didn't give him $178,000 so that he could break even or get to a level at which he's willing to take that loss, right? That's when you do the project or you don't. You already own the property, you've already sunk money into it. How much of a loss can I afford on this bad investment? Right?
I
Yeah, but that's-
don't think that's probably the calculation he's making, and frankly, that's not the calculation we should be making. What we should be deciding, I think, is what's in the public interest.
Sure.
And I think it's a question of
Let me, I still got stuck with the nonprofit versus the profit organization kind of thing too. I mean, we do have some money, and I do support, wanting to put additional money into CBAs. Just looking at, how they serving community, just within the Acre area alone. And I think they do also need some additional fund, especially when we're giving a lot of fund to the one across the street to almost, everything. And when we're talking about the for-profit, I mean, I do agree both way that, he's had the building, he's gonna fix it, and we are funding him, not the entire thing. But, I would go for, reducing it a little bit if you want, but still, I'm just balancing between CBA serving the resident area. I mean, if you ask the people, that put the money into CBA, who would you fund? The private agency, or would you fund the nonprofit organization? So, but, coming from a nonprofit world, I mean, of course I would, support an organization that provide, affordable housing and a good open space for people, versus the other way around. But I'm looking at the request that, from the Gorham Street, it's not that much either. So therefore, I mean, that's one way of me leaning toward that. So
I probably made a mistake. I'll make this quick. I probably made a mistake by bringing them both kind of together in the same conversation. The CBA. I'm not saying that we take money away from Gorham Street and we give it to CBA. That is not what I'm proposing. I like the idea of leaving some money left over, a little, something to let next year feel do it like we're doing as much good as this year, right? 'Cause
It's not going to.
well,
next year's going to be a very tough.
We're gonna be like,
because
this is way
yeah,
harder.
Yeah, we're like
We're going to have to start asking for some pro
We're-
formas.
Yeah, exactly. And I would like to. I've learned some things.
So just so everything's on the table, the exact amount that we have left over in non-open space funds, after everything is funded, except with nothing going to the CBA, except for the open space,
Yep.
is $193,000.
That's
So-
after you've fully funded Acre Crossing.
Fully funded Acre Crossing, assuming that Clemente Park is not open space.
So I do think in light of the conversation we just had, we do need to be conscious in our decision-making around Acre Crossing. Acre Crossing is also a for-profit development. Yes, they have structured the request as benefiting the homeowners. But the reality is there's other ways the homeowners could benefit if they weren't preserving profits in the for-profit aspect of the project. Now, one also should argue that it would not happen at all if there wasn't a profit for people who are investing in it. That's why it's happening, and that's why you support that. There are people who are going to make a profit from the CBA project who are tax credit investors as well. In all these cases, somebody will make a profit. I just want to make sure everybody realizes that we are being consistent. If we're having a concern in one project, we need to recognize a similar perspective on the others. If we're comfortable, which
Sure.
maybe we should be saying, okay, that's not an issue for us, right?
Yeah. From my perspective, I'm much more concerned about the project's viability going forward, and I feel like that. I mean, that's why some of the projects that we're not discussing anymore, I was not like the Girls Inc. project, which is just a reimbursement, and I feel like the CBA project. One of the reasons why I'm willing to give them less than their full ask is because they came forward and were looking for contingency, but their project costs were funded when they came to us. Unlike Gorham Street and unlike Acre Crossing, I feel like the distinction between those three projects in my head is one of them came in fully funded looking for contingency. The other two came in with gaps that they were looking to fill. And one, as Adam said, is a significant downtown property that I think we should prioritize trying to fix. The other one is a community housing project. And that's why, in my mind at least, I feel like those had significant gaps and we should work to fill those gaps. Whereas I feel like CBA, if we gave CBA 190,000 plus 27,000 for open space, 193,000 plus 27, they're getting $210,000 from us. I think that's a significant give to them. Actually, it's more than that. It's
$220,000.
$220,000.
Yes.
And I think that's a significant give for a project that came to us fully funded, just looking for contingency.
Yeah, it may be more than enough.
And the residents of the Acre Crossing will be paying into the CPA fund.
With every transaction that they make.
I'd be in favor of that approach, Eric, that you just described. The one that I still have a question about is whether we're giving that extra dollar amount beyond the $500,000 to the Acre Crossing. I'm for that project, but that project will be completed next year. And so if we left that money on the table, we could fund different projects.
The only reason why I'm pushing to fully fund the Acre project and not push it to next year, one is because it's a priority project, but also because they are using the funding they receive from CPA to leverage a Commonwealth Builder grant, which has a match requirement, 1-to-1 match requirement.
So it is proportional.
So it is proportional to a larger ask, and they also need that funding to complete this project. And so that's why I'm being a little bit more insistent on fully funding that one.
So that particular program, I know many of the state programs, they look for a municipal contribution, and once it's
And-
there, they'll support it.
And this is
this
the
one literally
only,
a formula where they need,
Yeah.
they need,
they need
the
municipal,
size of the municipal contribution affects the size of what they get.
correct.
Okay.
And right now, there is no other municipal contribution to this project,
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
right now.
Is that subject to change? Because we did talk about that with one of the other projects. I think in the end, we decided, at the moment, we're talking about going
Right,
and
well,
funding
because
it
the
anyway. but-
$600,000 project's more fun for the 500,000. Yeah, no, and there is no pending application.
Okay, okay.
So that it's not, it's something I'm sure, I'm anticipating, but it's not a pending application we have in front of us.
So if it came down to it, we're giving CBA the balance, the 193,000 that you got. We're fully funding the Acre project, and we're fully funding Gorham Street. And I would vote for that if it, if unless there's further deliberation.
I just had a quick, where it's the 193 to CBA plus the 27. Okay.
Plus the 27,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah.
Sorry.
220.
They're in two buckets for me because I got one in my open space section and one in my.
I just stopped writing things down once you guys did, so.
All right, let me try to summarize what I think we have. And if everyone,
Glad you did it.
if folks are in agreement, if somebody can make a motion to that effect. So I believe the proposal on the table, and I'm going to deliberately not talk about the Whistler House because somebody else needs to summarize
fill in
that
that
one.
one for you.
But
We'll do that when you leave.
yeah, the, and conveniently, the way we're proposing it, that's doable. The Clemente Park project at 110,000. And I'm going to,
This year's fund.
out of this year's money, yes. Try to get these numbers exactly right here. The 555 Merrimack Street at 220,000, 27,000 of which would be for open space and the balance for community housing. The CTI, A Place to Live, at 72,800. Acre Crossing at 763,200. 1 Plus Lowell at 500,000. The Downtown Lowell Building Restoration Fund at 500,000. and 80 Gorham Street at 178,100. Does someone want to make that in the form of a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Seconded.
All right. Any further discussion? I guess we need a roll call then, please.
Are you voting for all of them at once?
All at once.
Okay.
We probably do need to talk about conditions as well on some of these, but let's deal with the money part first.
Okay. Chairman Bakey,
Yes.
Vice Chair Slagle,
Yes.
Member Butenhuis,
Yes.
Member Gallivan,
Yes.
Member McCall,
Yes.
Member Liang,
Yes.
Member DePeza,
Yes.
and Member Shea.
Yes.
And I'm going to step away, or I'm not even going to step away. I'll let you just manage this one, Eric, for the other one.
And so I think I actually do want to speak about the condition when we make the motion. So my understanding is that we would be funding $100,000 for open space preservation for the Whistler House, with the condition that they obtain the value of the conservation restriction on the property, and that it is equal to or greater than the $100,000 grant. Does that sound?
I second that motion.
You make the motion?
I so moved. I make that into the form of a motion.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, any other discussion on that motion? Okay, roll call, please.
Vice Chair Slagle,
Yes.
Member Butenhuis,
Yes.
Member Gallivan,
Yes.
Member McCall,
Yes.
Member Liang,
Yes.
Member DePeza,
Yes.
and Member Shea.
Yes.
So I think that the other thing that I think we need to do is on some of these projects that we have proposed, or we've now supported funding, we do need to put some conditions in addition to the one you just voted. I think if we can start with 2 blanket conditions, which is for the open space projects that we have supported this evening, that we do require a conservation restriction. And for the historic preservation projects that we are supporting this evening, we will require a historic preservation restriction.
So moved.
I second that.
Any discussion? Can we have a roll call on that?
Chairman Bakey,
Yes?
Vice Chair Slagle,
Yes.
Member Butenhuis,
Yes.
Member Gallivan,
Yes.
Member McCall,
Yes.
Member Liang,
Yes.
Member DePeza,
Yes.
and Member Shea.
Yes.
And on the community housing projects, I believe we have a requirement there as well, don't we, that we need a affordability restriction on all of those? I suppose I should lump
o-
it.
Sorry. It's only required for projects in which you purchase land for affordable housing.
So there's no affordability restriction on the other ones? I think it's the permanent restriction that's.
It's not a permanent, that's correct.
Yeah, but we do need to have an affordability restriction, and we need, if we have an opinion as a committee that we want to recommend a particular term or nature of affordability on any of these projects, and it may be that we treat them independently, or, each one differently. But that would need to be part of our recommendations.
So I am not opposed to the Acre Crossing project. They suggested a 15-year affordability restriction, and I'm comfortable with that. I'm also comfortable increasing it if anyone else wants to. The CTI, the 72,000, it's pre-development cost, but it's for permanent supportive housing for unhoused individuals. So personally, I'd like it to be in perpetuity, because once that project is built, I'd like it to stay that way. But
I think
I don't want to bind someone forever, but I do think it should be a lengthy,
Like a 30-year term?
at least, yes. And then 1+ Lowell, I think, is similar to Acre Crossing. I think it's an opportunity for moderate to low-income individuals and families to purchase housing, and I think granting them an opportunity to also build generational wealth if they stay and invest in the property. So I am comfortable with the 15-year restriction on that one as well. But again, I'm willing to go longer if board members feel more strongly about it.
I was actually going to suggest a 10-year restriction on the 1 plus Lowell. But that's, I mean, it's obviously up to the board.
I'm fine with that also.
And what about the CBA project?
The CBA, my understanding of that project is,
It's gonna have other,
is a substance abuse disorder. So I actually prefer, similar to CTI, a longer term on that one, because I don't want to see that converted, because it's meeting a very specific need. And it is part of the ecosystem of when we're talking about unhoused individuals. And so it is part of, it is their services, wraparounds. And so, I mean, it's for someone further along in their program, but, so I would like a longer term on that than, so maybe making that, however, 32.
chances, well, probably some of the other funding in that is gonna carry a
Yeah.
term like that anyway, so that's probably not a big change for them. Okay, so I think what I heard was 15 years or 10 years for the, was there any consensus about that on the Acre Crossing and 1 plus Lowell?
Following your lead on that.
Let me throw another consideration into that,
Cool.
which is, in each of these cases, the money is proposed to be essentially homebuyer assistance. It could go in as a grant, it could go in as a loan, it could go in as a performing loan, or it could go in as a non-performing loan that merely needs to be repaid, no interest, no payments, but repaid if they sell or refinance. And there could be a term to that as well, that if they stay in the house for X amount of years, it gets waived completely. I completely agree with what we heard from the applicants, and we've heard from some folks tonight, that there is some real value in creating wealth for low-income families. I don't necessarily think that that translates to, if the market rises dramatically in a relatively short time period, that they could that it makes sense for them to turn around and turn the community investment into just a windfall. So we may want to consider that there's either some period of time that, or some sort of repayment obligation if they sell or refinance before a certain amount of time.
So would that mean, like, so we put the 15-year, so that means it's just, so if you buy it and sell it within 2 years, it stays affordable for 15, but you're saying like another time period on top of that 15?
No, it's like two different issues.
Payback money, I think, is
Okay.
And they actually relate, because the affordability restriction will suppress the value for that homeowner.
Right.
So the shorter the affordability restriction, the sooner they might be able to see some return. The other thing that we may wish to do, so that we manage whether it's a reasonable return or a windfall, particularly a windfall around like refinancing, cash out type of windfall, we might want to say that for some amount of years, and it would be coterminous, that it needs to be repaid if you refinance or sell. We also could require it to be a performing loan. I mean, I'm not so sure that's anything anybody wants to do, but and we might not want to do these things at all, but I think it's something we should think about in terms of how we make that recommendation on those. And we may not treat them the same either.
So if we did, which I'm not opposed to it, if we did that, so who would be paying us back? Me, who bought unit B?
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
So you would, the 1
wouldn't
plus
be-
Lowell is probably simpler, right? So you go out and buy a house.
Yeah.
And let's keep it really simple. $10,000 that helped you with your down payment came from the 1 plus Lowell program. Because it was part of your down payment, it's automatically equity. It's yours, but it actually was a gift. The money was brought in as a grant so it wasn't actually your savings. The appreciation in the value of the property is going to all be yours. But that original 10,000 could come back if you sell or refinance right away. Could come back to the program, so it could then be available to give to somebody else.
So what would
On the other hand, that's $10,000 less wealth created for the person, but it's not, but that wealth is not created by the appreciation in the value of the property. It's created by the grant that we gave right up front.
So I have a proposal which is a 15-year affordability restriction with a non-performing loan that has to be paid back 100% for the first 5 years, then prorated for the next 10. So that if you sold it in year 5, you'd have to pay back everything. But if you sold it in year 14, you'd only have to pay back
10%.
10% of what you borrowed. So the longer you're in the house, the less you'd have to pay back. And at 15 years, the affordability restriction drops and the payback drops, and you just own it all free and clear. So anybody who stays in there for 15 years basically gets the benefit of the windfall.
That
And
sounds
to be
lovely.
clear, that would come back to us, so that
Yeah, so it
would
would come back
potentially
to the
increase our
program.
pool. when
Come
you-
back to
Exactly
the,
right.
to the
Cool.
CPC.
I'm
Yep.
okay with that.
Yeah, sounds great.
And I think the prorating it like that allows someone who has to sell in year 13
Yeah.
from not,
Most of it goes to them.
yeah, they'll get most of it.
Yep.
They'll only have to pay us back a little, but if they have to sell, if they want to sell in year 5, they're giving us back everything. So I'll make that, and I think that should be the same for both
Yep.
Acre Crossing and 1+ Lowell.
Okay.
And so I'd make that in the form of a motion that we attach the condition that it be a non-performing loan with a prorated, with a payback requirement of 100% within the, if sold or refinanced within the first 5 years, and prorated for the next 10 years on a 15-year affordability restriction.
Okay. And then 30-year affordability restrictions on the Merrimack Street and CTI proposals.
And then 30-year affordability restrictions on both of those.
Can we actually put an affordability restriction on the CTI project at this point? Or does it have to be conditional on the project actually moving forward? Because we can't, if it's just pre-development costs.
I know.
And they never even acquire the property because it doesn't work out.
Well, we can require them as part of, if they acquire the property.
If they acquire the property.
If their property
Yeah.
is eventually acquired, that they have
Yep.
to give us a 30-year affordability restriction.
Okay.
I'll second that motion.
Did you get all that, Dylan? That was kind of like a lot. You good? Okay.
Nice. Yeah,
Well, that's
it.
true.
Listen to the video.
I'm not sure if that will help.
Yeah. Well, is that better or worse? Let's try to sort of afterwards what we did.
So I guess we need a roll call on that.
Okay. Chairman Bakey,
Yes.
Vice Chair Slagle,
Yes.
Member Butenhuis,
Yes.
Member Gallivan,
Yes.
Member McCall,
Yes.
Member Liang,
Yes.
Member DePesa,
Yes.
Member Shea.
Yes.
Right, and I have one more that we have to do, I think, which is for the LDFC program. There were a couple of
Oh, yeah, right.
proposed conditions, and I do think both of them are important. The first one, I think, is necessary in order for use of these funds to be eligible. Actually, I think both of them probably are ultimately. So we probably need to have a motion to attach those two conditions to that one.
So moved.
Okay, and do we have a second?
Seconded.
Thank you. Any discussion on that? All right, guess we need a roll call on that one.
Chairman Bakey,
Yes.
Vice Chair Slagle,
Yes.
Member Butenhuis,
Yes.
Member Gallivan,
Yes.
Member McCall,
Yes.
Member Liang,
Yes.
Member DePesa,
Yes.
and Member Shea.
Yes.
I believe that covers all the conditions and restrictions we need to do. I don't know if there are any conditions or restrictions anybody else wants to put into our recommendations to the council.
I have a question, a process question. What if one of the applicants that we've given money to doesn't like the condition?
They don't have to take the money.
But they can't come,
They can come back to
they
us.
can come back and appeal that, right? Not appeal it, but
There's
can,
not an appeal, they can
they can come back to us and say, I don't like that condition, can you change it? And we can say, sure, or we can say, no.
Okay.
I mean,
I was just trying to figure out,
yeah,
you know,
Yeah.
because we have to send it
But-
to the city manager, who could send it back to us, or could just
Yes.
send it to the city council.
right, and either of those bodies could also send it back if they don't like the conditions.
So in theory, if an applicant doesn't like a condition, they could, when this is on an agenda, they could bring up, and then that could be sent back to us. Like,
Yep.
and can they send back, sorry, I'm just trying to understand. Are they like every project but one? Can they approve all of it and send one back to us, or does it have to come back as a package?
No, I think we're gonna have, it's gonna be separate.
Line item.
There's gonna be a line item for each project, and they can reject an individual project and send it back. They
So-
can't change the funding source,
Okay.
so they can't change our bonds to coming from other money. If they don't like the bond, they have to just send it back.
Or the dollar value.
If they don't like the dollar value, they can't change it.
Yeah, they can't change anything about
Right.
it. They can either approve it or deny it.
Right, and if they,
Can I ask a weird question? Can the applicant also show up at the city council and explain the project?
absolutely, I would expect most of them will.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea for them.
Okey-dokey.
So I don't have any, didn't see any other need for conditions. I don't know if anybody else.
Okay. I know we're anxious to make our favorite motion, but we might have one we like even better, which is, since we don't have any more business for January 27th, do we want to?
I move to cancel the January 27th meeting.
Adam's gonna be there.
Any second on that? Yeah, I'll make that one.
I'll second that one.
All those in favor? I don't think we need a roll call for that. Anyone opposed?
Aye.
All right. And then the actual,
Well, before we don't have to motion to move to send it to the manager. We've done, that's essentially a done.
recommendation we made,
Okay.
right?
I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second on that one?
Seconded.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, thanks
Aye.
very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thank you.